Welcome everybody, I'm Santiago Kneeland and this is The Divine Within, the invisible connection with God. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the second mile. What is it to really be and explore one of the most practical and transformative spiritual skills that we can develop? Learning how to truly love another person. Joining me is Susan Lyon, longtime student of the Urantia book, author, artist, poet, and devoted seeker of truth whose spiritual journey has been guided by a lifelong passion for understanding both God and human connection. Together we'll explore why people stop feeling heard, how Jesus instinctively met people exactly where they were, and what it means to go the second mile, choosing to love others in the way they needed to be loved, rather than the way that comes most naturally to us. Because sometimes the greatest expression of divine love isn't a grand gesture, it's learning to speak someone else's language. So welcome, Susan. It's a pleasure having you here.
Thanks, Santiago. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
And this is an interesting topic, and I'm glad that you brought it up because we sometimes do not communicate correctly, and it's really important to understand behind it. So in this first segment, we're going to be talking about why we stop feeling heard. So we all want the same thing, to feel seen, valued, and understood. Yet many relationships don't fail because communication stops. They struggle because somewhere along the way, people stop feeling heard. In this segment, we'll explore why connection breaks down, why family becomes our greatest classroom for learning love, and how understanding begins long before we even speak. So tell us about this language and the different types of language. It's very interesting, the way that we can communicate. Susan.
Well, I think from the beginning, when we're born, we begin to interpret each other through even just visual uh, cues. You know, long before we can even speak, we're taking cues from parents and from others and interpreting emotion and the love and care from them, even visually from body language. And that's the beginning of communication. Um, as far as communication goes, it can be expressed in many ways, and that's how love is shared. And for us to know ourselves to begin with, what we need, it's kind of hard to put a finger on that as well. But sometimes when you feel hurt, it might be a cue or a clue to you exactly where your needs are most for those needs, emotional needs, to be met. And it's also a journey learning those you're communicating with what their needs are as well. And relationships evolve, so it's a constant learning process. Not obviously when you meet new people, it's, you begin to learn. And that was the interest I had in this, was the psychology of that, really, because you really put ourselves out there in the normal, natural way we express ourselves. That doesn't always meet another person's needs. Even you
Mm-hmm.
love them 100% in your own style, and it could be missing the mark of what their need really is. So it's a give and take and a learning process all the
Yeah.
way. And to guess is to probably miss the mark. And so it's about communicating and asking rather than assuming, and or loving the natural way. And then if you observe that the results aren't working that you hope for, rather than being disappointed or heard or feeling unheard, rather to go ahead and ask, what do you need? How are you feeling? And basically that is what it is listening to engaging the response that you get when you're projecting love. And that way you're not feeling hurt or unloved when you feel like you're doing everything you can do. It's a fine tuning thing, but it's an
Yeah.
art, and it can be a challenge, but it's also rewarding when you've, cracked the code with the psychology of what someone needs.
So this is interesting, and I mean, you just brought a lot of information, and I mean, I took a lot of notes, but in a general sense. You started off with the nonverbal language, and I think that's very important. Anytime that you come into a room, it depends on your mood. You know, and I was talking the other day with my cousin. He was in a podcast, and how feel empathy, and you come into a room, and he's a very lovable guy, very charismatic, and how he can change the tone and the feeling inside a room just with his expression of his corporality, of his nonverbal expression. So how important that is. And I, for instance, I get a lot of cues. I've been a salesman for all my life, and I get a lot of cues from, just I don't even pay attention to it. It's like just there, and the way that people talk and how they relate to me or they interact. I kind of pick up cues. So it's really important to take into consideration. But you're saying into something, you're taking into something more active, more proactive, where, like you said, it's a two-way frequency, and it's asking, not assuming. So this is interesting because you can have, the will to communicate, but you also have to have somebody that understands this, and how important it is, if you don't even understand how to communicate, to really understand what each one needs in that communication. So how can you, or how does this work, or how did this come about? And realizing that there's different communications and there's styles of communication.
Well, first of all, we've for years seen how perfectly Jesus communicated and how successful he was. And I well, actually, my husband, Rick, gave me a book called The Love Languages of God by Dr. Gary
Hmm.
Chapman. And he had read it years ago. And I was astonished how modern psychology actually fits right in to how Jesus did it. And
Okay.
I always thought of Jesus' communication style as being perfect because he was divine. But the more I checked into it, I realized, if you could put the word listened into the search engine, Jesus listened attentively to his, and there's so many times
Mm,
as it said that was how he went about getting to know people, gauging their receptivity, learning what they needed. And that's where he said the best way to understand people is to be friendly, to put yourself out there and to learn what they need most and then do it for them if you're sure that's what they need and want. And that was how he met all relationships. And what's interesting is he's revealing to us that's exactly what God does. He loves us in the way we need to be loved. We just need to understand it. And it comes through other people. And we also share God's love through us to others as well. We're the
yeah.
on the ground way of sharing God's love. So it's an art form, really. When we say communication, we think just language, but it's far more than that. And there's a an art to it.
So what does this book tell us in the languages? Because I think this is very interesting, and I've seen it with my children, and we've talked about this, and how my wife knows about these different styles of communication, let's say. So what can you tell us about these styles, and then we're going to compare that to how Jesus, expressed and communicated. But what are more or less? I mean, we don't have to go in depth, but more or less, so that the audience can understand.
Well, Dr. Gary Chapman separated it into five love languages,
Okay.
and um, they they briefly are labeled as uh, like words of affirmation,
Mm-hmm.
quality time, physical touch,
Okay.
acts of service, and gifts. Now,
Ok-
and we could go into a little detail about that. Like, somebody might misunderstand and say gifts. Well, that means that's a material person that they just want gifts. But it's very much more about the appreciation of the effort that goes into choosing a gift to
Okay.
the people
It's
that
the detail. It's the detail that counts, right?
it's
It's
yeah,
intention that counts.
that's what it all comes down to, and we're all products of how we were raised, method we were given love by parents and siblings, the family around us. So if you received thoughtful gifts and that was how you were shown love, you might,
Yeah.
you know, really still need that from others or a mate or, whatever. But that's how it all happens is we have our natural method of receiving love, and not all children receive love in the way they need it. And that's another thing. Children are sort of vulnerable because they're not able to really express well what they need. And unless you're asking them, and there are kind of games you can play with them as well to kind of pull it out of them what they would prefer, what makes them happy. You can see the response on someone's face when they receive love in the way that's really connecting with their heart, with their emotion. You can see it in their face, really, if you're observing. Like you said, you pick up the cues. So,
Yeah.
the love languages, though, Jesus did the same thing. He gave. He was very generous. He gave when it was needed. He was very attentive for the words of affirmation. He was always positively building up people to be strong and positive. And as far as affection and physical touch, we're told many times how he put a hand on someone's shoulder to encourage them, or he would, just touch their arm or whatever, just to show that there was love, and that's sometimes all it's needed. It doesn't, physical touch means they just need to know that you care enough to reach out for them. And I think we talked about that can be culturally gauged. Sometimes it's a hug is appropriate. Sometimes maybe you just pay attention to what the person needs and how they respond.
So you were saying, Susan, and it's really, it comes down to paying attention. But so how because in the end, I mean, we're talking about the communicate or relationships don't fail. It's communication. So I can understand, and I can relate. With my wife at after 15, 17 years basically of a marriage and three kids, and we were different persons when we met 20 some years ago, no, 17 some years ago, not that much, but she was an attorney. So how can you evolve, and this is important, and the more I think about it, in the communication, where you can keep that communication, and that can keep fresh, because in the end, I mean, you're living with the same person, and that kind of breaks down. So what is it that you can do as practical, I mean, apart from what you're saying, to have that communication, that dual, that back and forth that you're saying.
Well, it's always evolving, and as you get older, things change. But
Yeah,
I think being like in the moment and keeping it spontaneous and genuine is the key. Um, Not ever taking
yeah,
for granted that things are like they were 20 years ago because you're growing together. But there's always, I mean, first of all, you're not together unless you love each other. You're
yeah,
there.
yeah. It's a
And
choice. It's an everyday choice. Yeah,
yeah. And so you give the other person, the grace to know that they're loving you in the way they know best, and to accept the love as it's intended, and to express your needs, um, instead of, there's a negative way of going about that. And we don't want that. We want a positive way of reinforcing.
yeah,
That really is awesome. I love when you do that. Or, you know,
yeah,
there's
yeah.
positive way to encourage that. Or I
Which is
really,
really important, and you don't notice, and you get into a rut. That's something that you cannot get into those cycles, and it's important to realize that you're in that cycle and kind of break it, and create a, like you're saying, a positive cycle, a
yeah,
loop.
that can happen at any time. I mean, you don't want to form the negative cycles, but they can always be improved or broken. And
Yeah,
that was one of the things I read in the doctor's book about. Of course, he's a clinical psychologist, so he's had, zillions of customers, clients that have gone through these problems, and it's always possible to fix a relationship. And that is what it is. It's not just marriage, but it's family. It can be a
Yeah.
relationship with anyone
Your
that can always
father.
be improved. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. So it's really important that we learn how to communicate. And we're going to close this segment right here, and we're going to go into to see how Jesus communicated. So stick around. What if love isn't a feeling as much as it is a language? Every person receives care differently, and Jesus seemed to understand this instinctively. In this segment, we'll explore the 5 love languages, how Jesus uniquely connected with each person he met, and why the most powerful act of love may simply be learning how another person experiences it. So, what's this unique connection? And we touched a little bit in our previous segment on Jesus' relationship with people.
Well, part of the thing that shocked me is with Jesus, being divine and perfect. I was kind of shocked to know that he had differing relationships with siblings, his own siblings, even. And that told me that every relationship he had to work at, just like everyone else. And they're
Yeah.
not maybe going to all be perfect because it doesn't just depend on you, it depends on the other person to engage with you. And so if someone is, and some relationships are easier than others.
Yeah.
Maybe we interpret each other's cues a little easier or whatever. But Jesus actually got along really excellently with most of his siblings, but there were some difficult relationships. He was always patient, he was always forbearing and tolerant. And in the end, that graciousness and that goodness won the difficult relationships over to
Hmm.
be good relationships. So that goes to show that if you're persistent and you really are trying, you really show the patience and the grace for someone that maybe isn't that easy of a relationship. mm, I'm guessing most of the time those relationships could be healed. And that's what this comes down to is the communication can either harm or heal, and that's what we want. Obviously, we want to project the love and the healing aspect of communication to maintain these great relationships.
As you're talking, Susan, something that comes to mind, especially where you're talking about Jesus, is example. You know how he taught through example. It wasn't just, scolding or, giving you a recommendation. It was really, living up to what he was teaching. You brought up his siblings, and it's something that a lot of people do not know. And like you said, it gives you a lot of dimension and context in what he had to experience, go through, and many of the things that we go through. It wasn't that, everybody was just on his feet adoring him or glorifying him. He had, the typical relationships, maybe not as a conflictive, maybe, as earthly, but there were those relationships. So it's interesting how he showed that example, and there's some cases maybe you can bring up a few, but what can you tell us about this way that he taught, or that he showed this love through his
Well,
language?
the time when he took his younger brother Jude to Jerusalem for
Yeah.
Passover for his first time to go to the temple and be confirmed, from finishing his schooling. The first thing Jude did was get in trouble and get arrested. And he was trying to, stand up for a girl who had been mistreated by a Roman soldier.
It was
But
a righteous cause. Yeah, we can give him that. Yeah.
yeah, but he was kind of a hothead and, spoke out quickly and didn't think and immediately got arrested. So he missed all of the ceremonies that he was meant to go to and enjoy because he was in jail all weekend. So Jesus stayed with him at the jail,
Yeah.
and as time went on, the family never knew because he didn't tell them right. Well, I guess they did know. Eventually, he told them, but not right away. But anyway, um, over some other things, the family were ready to throw him out, throw Jude out on the street. And Jesus actually said, no, give him time, give him a chance to work things out. He wouldn't work. He wasn't contributing to the family. He was out of school already, and he could have worked if he wanted to.
He was that family member that we all know and have, right?
Yeah. And so Jesus said, no,
It's
please
which is hard
stay
to
away
love
from him.
sometimes.
Right. Yeah. And eventually, Jesus won him over. He found a great girl. He got married. He contributed to the family. He was always there on the weekends, to visit with Jesus. And he ended up being really loyal and a loving. He was there when Jesus was baptized, actually.
Yeah,
And
he was there throughout his from all his siblings. I think he was one of the most active throughout his public ministry, right?
yeah, exactly. And it just goes to show that Jesus put the time and the care into that relationship, and and he was rewarded with a really loyal and loving brother. And it was a great relationship. So it was healed over, I mean, many times he was a little difficult to have in the family, but he was worth the effort. And Jesus felt that
Yeah,
way too. Whereas the other part of the family might have given up on him.
yeah. Which is very important, and you know, one thing that's important, in saying to understand other people, and this is something, as we were saying, empathy and how that goes really a long way. When you have a genuine desire to have a conversation and not just, to get the benefit of something, or just to sell in many cases, or just, do without. But when you genuinely engage, even if it's just very simple, um, and that person, and the key word is genuinely, because then that person really feels that interest, and it can be something very simple where you compliment them on something, or you ask them about something they have, or start a conversation, but it's something that becomes an interest, that it's of their interest, or you try to help them out, and many times, I see somebody trying to do something in the train, or trying to get by, and I can just walk by and not mind, but I see that they're struggling, and I lend a hand, and I point them out, and you can see that, and how the energy, and this is something I was talking with my cousin the other day. It's not just verbal communication, nor nonverbal communication. There's an energy, a vibe, that really changes the attitude and into positive. And it comes down to a lot to energy. You can have negative and positive or neutral. And in this case, you kind of change it to a positive polarity, right?
I think you're so
So,
right.
I mean, I just wanted to share that. And what was your opinion on that?
I totally think you're right about that because the energy really is reflecting, it is coming from a place of love. Just, you can, and a person can perceive that. They sense when you're being genuine and when you're being honest,
Yeah.
sincere. And that's where this comes from, is this sincerity that you're really concerned for them. Even if it's a gesture of helping someone with a door, if they're carrying groceries or whatever, they sense that it's coming from concern and care for them.
Yeah, you're going out of your way. You're stepping out of your daily
Yeah.
existence to mind them.
And a lot of people label that as service, but what it comes down to is a genuine caring for persons that
Yeah.
even you don't know. But I was looking through some um references as before we came on, and really, if you believe that God is the Father of all,
Hmm.
then there is no stranger. That's what Jesus said. There are really no strangers.
Yeah.
There should be some happiness in meeting anyone that's a new brother or sister. And if you think of it in that way, um, it really brings a different aspect to it than just service. It's extending God's love really to another. And that's what's important about it to me, is that it's very healing to everyone. When
Yeah.
you think of it in that way, you're not really burdened. The love is flowing through you from
Yeah.
God.
Yeah. No, no, none at all. I mean, and on the contrary, what you get from that connection, I think, is very rewarding. And I think, that's a lot of people do not see the value in that. It's not that, oh, I'm just giving out to them, but what you get in part, that feeling, that energy that you get from that exchange, it's really, really powerful. So that really feeds your soul, in my opinion.
It really does. I know a lot of people say just do the service and eventually you'll be rewarded from it. I think that's true, but um, I think that it comes from the heart in the first place. I don't think
Yeah,
you
the genuine, like that's the purpose. I mean, the reason when it's really heartfelt, that really goes a long way.
and just a smile. It said
Yeah.
that Jesus went around spreading good cheer and smiles to hundreds of people when he traveled, and it gives many cases of people he met just briefly, and it changed their lives. So even a smile,
Yeah.
even though it might not seem like a lot,
Oh, it's powerful.
the difference
Eh,
in a person's day, you have no idea what they've been through and how a positive gesture like that really makes a difference.
Yeah, yeah. I'm for one is that I'm a very hard believer in smiles, and that's something that become accustomed to me. And maybe you can see that in my podcast and every relationship I have, any communication, I tend to smile, and it's just a normal tendency, and I try to. And it's interesting now that we're talking, and maybe I hadn't really realized it in depth, but that ups the frequency. And regardless of what situation, you can be in a business situation. I always try to crack a joke. I mean, that's the best thing to do when you're in a business situation and everything is very tense, and you sense that somebody needs something, and that's the idea. When you crack it on, and you do it in a way that kind of benefits the other person, in a way that really opens up, and they really lower their guard, and that really starts a very nice and very positive communication flow, definitely.
Yes, definitely. And it shows that, we know humor is healing too. So anytime that you can share a laugh, that's a beginning. It's a beginning right there of a good relationship. Yeah, humor is wonderful. And it relaxes the whole situation.
And I'm also a very big believer in laughing. And when you look at your really closest relationships, your friends, you're always joking, and it's interesting. And the other day I was realizing and was thinking about this, and it's really the people that you grew up with, or your deep friends. They're the ones that know all your flaws, that know what you've been through. They know if you're bluffing or not. If if they know if what's behind anything. So they really know you. So when you get into this dynamic, when it's really cracking jokes and make poking fun, in a positive way, you can where your boundaries are, but that really lightens everything up. And this is something that I really like about the Rancher book. It's I'm going to paraphrase, that says that laughter and comedy, I think, is the best antidote to the ego, the exaltation of the ego. So I mean,
Exactly.
when you get in those dynamics, with people that you need to take light, and that they know, you understand that you have to take things light. And I like one concept about the Mayan matrix pattern. It's called el encantamiento del sueño, which is the dream spell. And it says that we come into this material life and play, we play in a play, and we take on different characters. And you go, somebody goes and becomes a doctor throughout the day, but he comes home and he's a father, and he gets scolded by his wife, maybe the same way that anybody else, and it's the same dynamics, but you find in a play. So how interesting and important is that we see with, very lightheartedness, these relationships, and we do not take ourselves so seriously in the way that we relate with each other, right?
I agree. And it's a challenge. I come from a serious kind of family in the first place. So it's a challenge for me to kind of I mean, I feel like I'm a positive and an enthusiastic and person, but at the same time, I'm probably not the one joking around because it never seems to work. But there's nothing better than somebody laughing at something I've said. It's like a joy for me. So that's like a gift
Yeah,
that I receive
definitely.
of love when someone gets me and thinks it's funny. That's wonderful, but It's one of the rare things because I don't think I'm that funny at all, but I just must have a different sense of humor or whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it really the vibe. You can share positive um, feelings through that, and
Yeah.
yeah, that's important to lift someone else up, and you can see how how they
Well, I mean, there's even the movie Patch Adams, and there's a whole study and everything. How comedy and there's the doctors, and there's a lot of foundations throughout the world that go to hospitals and make their patients laugh, and that gives them that chemically also uplifts them. Not only energetically. So the importance of making somebody, and as we were talking, and I think because we're talking about the way Jesus communicated in his communication or language, um, it's really taking interest. I mean, that's one of the other key takeaways. When you really take interest, and this is something that I learned from my grandfather. And this is something that I really take to heart. And I met a lot of people because he was a businessman, and one of the things that everybody can tell you is that he always made you feel important, and regardless of the person that you were, you could be the worker in the line, and he knew a lot of stuff. And I mean, I'm a younger generation, and anybody that was from that time would always talk to me about my grandfather, and would give me this, that, customers, everybody. And that's really important because he always asked about them. He knew about certain things, and he took care of just the conversation. So that really goes a long way. And you don't even know. Yesterday, it's interesting. I had a conversation with a gentleman that is, he had sort of addiction problems, and things kind of came out into what happens in because here in Europe you don't have those rituals and ceremonies and sacred rites and everything, like in the Americas, in the U.S. with the Native Americans, in Mexico with Mesoamerica. And I explained to him how everything is a ritual, and depending on the way that you intend it. And he was moved, and I told him you should try to do it, and try to focus on the fire, and try to meditate, and try to break from those addictions. And it was probably a 5-minute conversation, and I really was heartfelt, and I gave him my true opinion, and he was really thankful. And he told me, it was a really good conversation, and thank you for having this conversation with me. I don't know if that really changed his life or not, but in that moment, maybe a seed that really changed them.
it sounds like you came from the right place with caring for him. It was meant to help uplift him. And that's exactly what Jesus did. And actually, I ran across something that said he never followed up with the people. He assumed that they would grab the positive energy, and and it said that they never felt that they were confiding in him. They always felt they were conferring with him. He
Mm,
always made them feel
yeah,
worthy and equal. And
uh,
he had a way of
I like this.
yeah,
It's not
the
a
vo
confession, because that's a really important part in Catholicism, confession in many parts of Christianity, but it's conferring. I like this. It's really, sharing, and not really, from a guilt standpoint, but rather a loving standpoint, of understanding and empathy, right?
he made them feel like, we're all in this together, and he was their help, there to support them, there to cheer them on, basically, and that's what he
Yeah,
did. It said that he never really, encouraged pity. He
yeah.
he empowered them with good, you know, advice. I hate to call it advice because but he had always good ideas for them,
Yeah, with
to
good information, with
forward.
with
Yeah,
with truth. I mean, truth is boundless, and it's timeless. That's another thing that we were talking about the other day. How the mythical stories and the mythical archetypes, they can be thousands of years old. Uh, and the moral, ethical, and religious norms can change. Societies and civilizations can change, but the values and the important information from those stories are true to our day. So that's really immutable. Those truths and those facts that really guide us, and set those cornerstones are really important in throughout our lives, and it's important that we communicate. And this is, guiding me into that, how important it is to communicate these virtues, these values, these stories as well. That can really uh, um, set you in the right direction. If you have any closing remarks on Jesus, we're gonna close this segment right here and then move into the second mile. But I don't know if you want to add something before we move.
Yeah, I have one other story that he met a young boy in the mountains that was discouraged. He had
Okay.
he had not found any comfort from his friends. His father had passed away when he was 12, and he basically went to the hills to be alone because he just was so discouraged. Jesus found him, and as they were traveling through, and asked him, what has discouraged you so much on such a beautiful day as today, and the boy really wasn't willing to talk. And so, his first approach didn't work. So Jesus, of course, said, well, I can tell that you're not, feeling well and you've come out here to be alone. So obviously you don't really want to talk. But as I look at you, I really think, there's something at all that I can do for you. I would be glad to do it. And the boy still didn't want to talk. So he said, well, would it be possible for me to, you know, impose upon you? Do you know these trails very well? Could you help me find my way to Phoenix? And the boy knew the area really well. And he perked up and he said, oh, yeah, I can show you the trails. And he gave him all the details and mapped it out for him, and everything. And it, it engaged him in the
Mm.
conversation only. And so
Yeah,
Jesus,
yeah.
you know, as he was thanking him and leaving, he turned around suddenly and he said, since you've helped me so much, it would be thoughtless for me to leave. If I didn't ask you, what could I do for you? Since I know what it's like for to be downcast. I've been there. And and he said, since you've asked me, and the boy said, well, I didn't ask you for anything. He said, you did by the look. He said, I could see that you need someone to talk to. And so they finally sat down and had a great conversation, and it changed the boy's life. He encouraged him to be a man, to get out there in the world. He had a healthy body and to make the most of his life and to turn it around. And it did. It worked.
A
And he
simple
had,
conversation. Yeah,
yeah, the boy really just needed someone to care enough to be persistent enough to talk to
yeah,
him and
yeah.
help him, encourage him. And that, just shows the persistence Jesus had until he broke through the exterior and the love he showed, you know, and it was well received.
Well, I like this story to end this segment because we're going to talk about going the second mile. So stay tuned. In this segment, we're going to talk about going the second mile. We talked about how there's different communication styles or languages, let's say, of love, of how to express love. And we've talked about how Jesus communicated and went about his daily life, not only as a divine being, but also as a human being, and throughout his relationships, personal, and throughout his ministry, the public life that he had. But in this segment, we're going to be talking about going the second mile. And here's where love becomes a choice. It's easy to love others the way that we naturally express affection. The challenge is loving them the way they need to receive it. In this final segment, we'll explore what Susan calls the second mile, the intentional practice of moving beyond ourselves to create deeper relationships, stronger families, and a more compassionate world. So tell us about the second mile, Susan, and what it's all about.
Well, we all know how we feel and what we need for love to be emotionally fulfilled. And what we usually need is usually how we project love in our communication style. And so we can love someone 100% in our own style, and maybe it's not being received as well as we would like. So we could recognize maybe that we're not being effective, that the person is still not feeling what we're intending. And I think parents go through this a lot, usually. This is, I think they can really relate to this. They feel like they're loving,
Teenagers, especially.
yeah, you're loving your child. there's, there's no more love. I mean, you love them as much as possible. And maybe they don't always get it. And so that's probably the best example of that. But there's something in that child that they need that
Yeah.
it's worth investigating and trying to find out how to connect with them. And that can evolve as they grow older and they become an adult or whatever. But basically, you always need to keep, your finger on the pulse of what does that individual need?
Yeah.
And then do you love them enough to go out of your comfort zone of love, of showing love, and do for them what they need? And
Okay.
that's what the second mile is. It's loving them so much that you'll do um, the style that they need to hit that emotional mark that you're trying to fill for them,
Okay.
especially with children or or close loved ones, family, m- a mate or whoever. And it's not always easy or comfortable for you to do that.
Yeah.
And so what it comes down to is, do you love them enough to love them in the style they need to be loved? And you're always gauging what they need, and the best way to ask is, what do you need? And sometimes you may be surprised. You may think you know what they need, but it may not be
You don't? You don't?
the
It's you
yeah,
misguide yourself to thinking that what you think they need is what they really need, but it's not.
right. And so what it comes down to is, again, what Jesus did is listening, asking questions, and that is where you begin. Um, especially in a long relationship, like family relationships or marriage, like we were talking about before. um, you never can stop really doing that, or you are in danger
Yeah.
of going into one of those ruts, like you said. It needs to be refreshed all of the time for you to really be successful in healing relationships.
Can I make a pause here and comment? And I think this goes both ways. And let me give an example. For a long time, and this is the relationship I had with my father, which now is very great. I think I we had to go through a long process and different things, long story, but it was a very really hard relationship. And one of the things that I always needed from my father was validation, do something that I needed validation and that I did this good, did it. And he would always, let's say that he wasn't expressing and I didn't understand his communication style when I was a kid. I had to become an adult. Uh, but in the way that he expressed, he was always criticizing, or he was, looking at pointing out the negativity, really, kind of souring up the moment. And I became accustomed to that until I got up to a point where I was fed up with that, and I kind of distanced myself. But then I realized, and I said, I'm never gonna change my father. That's the way he is. That's the way he. And when I loved him for what he for what he is and who he is, and then realize that his communication, although harsh, and in Spanish we say amor apache, which is like Indian love, which is really tough. It's love, and you can really take it from there, from where it comes. So it's really also, when you're receiving that, you also understand, and you don't, you heal. You said the word heal, those relationships as well. When you're the receiver, not only who's communicating, or the
Exactly.
speaker.
Well, you're actually communicating by responding with grace and with forgiveness.
Yeah,
And also, it sounds like as you become an adult, understood that your father was loving you,
yeah.
was probably his method of trying to make you the best person that he could raise you to be, by saying, okay, you could do better here.
Yeah, 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 actually,
You
that's it,
know,
yeah.
may not have been perfect for you. And there you could go and talk about an entire family. I don't know how many brothers and sisters you might have, but that would land differently on each personality, on each
Yeah.
child. See, it's not a one size fits all thing when you're a parent either. You have to tailor it for each child, but not everyone does that. And I'm not saying I've done it to perfection. I'm still trying to learn the differences in my own. I have 4 kids. Still
Yeah.
trying to learn the
And it's
differences.
it's four different worlds. It's four different persons that you have to understand.
Exactly. And they would all give you a different response as how loving a mother or how good of a mother I have been. And being honest. And I would say that some of the kids are much easier to understand and to help them feel loved because maybe my style isn't reaching more. So it's always a challenge. But I think that's awesome that you have, like, I don't know, given love and started a new relationship with your father. I mean, have you expressed to him? I mean,
No, yeah, definitely, definitely. No, and we went through a lot of different. I mean, it wasn't just a situation where we just distanced. I mean, we lived through different things, and I think it's really. I mean, it's a interesting story. Maybe I'll write a book one time, sometime.
yeah,
But there was a whole family legacy there, and a lot of bad things, and throughout and in business, and a lot of things that we had to go through to mend and to break a lot of bad cycles within the family, and that go beyond, it's and you can see those negative trajectories, or the negative spirals. But it was a lot of breaking that, and I see, not only in me, the way that I've evolved from as a person, but my father as well. And we discussed this, and in hindsight, we both, as individuals and collectively in our relationship, have really, really gone the second mile, if, to put it in a way, and understood each other. And it's no longer about trying to seek that validation, or try to seek that way of approval, or that to find that love in that communication with my father, but it's understanding in that, just relating with him and the way that he is really loving, and I like it now. It serves me good.
it's awesome. I mean, that's what we're hoping for is for everyone to be able to go go into these relationships with better understanding and more positive intent, for love, for forgiveness with each other. So I mean, we're in a tough world. We really are. And there's a lot of dysfunction in families and in relationships. And to be honest, a lot of people, I think we're at a place where people want to just give up and walk away from relationships. But as long as there's a sincere baseline um, between people, I would never give up on somebody. As long as they're
Yeah,
sincere, yeah, they're
yeah.
worth.
And in some cases, it's not giving up, but maybe putting things on hold. You don't know what evolution and through what process, and how long that process that person may have. Never
Yeah,
give hope, and maybe you might have to distance, because maybe some people cause you harm because of some process that they may be going through. But never give up on that. They will probably, eventually come out, and through that process, and healed, and improve that relationship. Because in some cases, you want to have that, but it's really too hard to have, because there's no receptivity on the other part. I think both. That's why it's the second mile.
that,
Both people
that's
have to want to come to the middle in
that's
the
really
end.
true. It takes two
Yeah.
people to maintain a relationship, a healthy relationship. If you've done everything you possibly can do to um, lift that relationship up and to make it a good relationship, a healing relationship, then you can't do more than that. I mean, you can put it on hold, like you said. Time sometimes can do what we can't do in the moment.
And that's the beauty, and the magic, and the be yeah, the about time. Time gives everybody the potential to become perfect. Well, not potential, becomes a reality. So each step, it doesn't matter if some metals take a longer time and higher degrees to heat up and melt. And that might be it. So never give up on anybody, and always be open, and you'll know when it's sincere, and it doesn't mean, because sometimes people may say, oh, he's done it many times. You know when it's sincere, and it's always good to put a hold, let's put it that way, in relationships when they're not productive. But it's really interesting, and yeah, it's throughout life, and I think that's part of growing up, and definitely, as I had children, and I started becoming, my dad's role as a father, as in business and in everything that or not everything, but a lot of things that I criticize, and I, maybe thought that I could do better, not do better, but that I was maybe too harsh on him for that. Once I lit them, I said, well, it wasn't that easy after all. There's a lot of stuff to be learned, and there's even I don't know what the name is. I don't know if it's in English, but there's the way, something that goes like the way that a son views his father, and it says at 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, and it goes all the way to when the father dies, and at the beginning he's the hero. Then you see the middle part where, father is an idiot. He always, messes his things up, and, see that progression. And in the end, he says, I regret the death of my father. He was such a wise man, and I could have learned so much. So that's really important to consider.
Well, that goes kind of back to the commandment about honoring your father and mother if possible, because you really do learn so much from them if you do, um, and valuable information. It makes your life easier in the long run because you want to make the most of their wisdom, right?
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, instead of starting from square one every generation. But yeah, that's why it's good to have grandparents around too, if at all possible.
Yeah, no, definitely, and to have the family pitch in and contribute, because and we were talking about this the other day, as well. I think this is a good 2 weeks that we're gonna be talking about these topics, but my cousin was talking about heaths, which is centers, and he calls this power sources, and there's a family heath where you have the living room, the fireplace. That's where stories are told, where things are interacted, and where what's the typical Christmas scene? It's everybody gathered around a fireplace next to the tree, being there.
Yeah,
So that's really one image to point out, and how valuable the relationships are among each other.
yeah, especially the stories. The stories stay
Yeah,
with. Yeah,
the family stories, and that's another point. The family stories, not only the all the myth and legends that we have from all civilizations, but the family stories, and the uncle did this, and the way the grandmother did that, and all those, and they make them immortal, in a way.
and we should really. It's wonderful because a lot of times many of the traits that were in a certain person that like is gone, and my great grandchildren would never know. I can see in them it passes on. The
Yeah,
traits continue, and the
definitely.
family, it stays alive. The person stays alive through the young ones coming up.
Yeah.
It's amazing, really.
And you would say, oh, she was too close, or she got this, or she picked it. There was somebody died, and a child was born 5 years later, and he has those those
Exactly.
traits and those things. It's magical, definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and they're very precious. I will just say that we're never going to be perfect, but it's worth the effort when you see people happier, and
yeah,
that's what we're going for. We want happier families, happier marriages, and we didn't talk about it, but if you guess and you just continue to guess, you're liable to be right with the mark with the emotions,
yeah.
with the love 20% of the time. And that's why we're having problems with divorce and having
Yeah,
problems
yeah,
with families breaking up and not speaking because they're not they're not looking
yeah.
for the results of the type of love and communication that they're putting out and not improving upon it. So it takes effort.
Yeah. No, definitely. And it's really important to, in this effort that you're putting and you're saying, and that at least we put it out and we try to get to that second mile. We might not be able to get there because it doesn't depend just on us. It depends on the other person. And this is something that we want to point out.
Yeah.
It's not that, magically just will it. The other will has to be in there, and that's the thing about humans. But at least if you give that extra mile and it's not on you, you really put it out and you try to mend things and you try to work things out, then at least you feel relieved, and you feel that it wasn't on you and all that spite you might have or all those bad feelings you might have really dissolve and open up, right?
Right. And one of the things I will say about Jesus is he he when he tried to do something or make a gesture for someone, it tended to create gratitude in them. And there's
Yeah.
no better time to get through and really make a deep connection with someone than when they're feeling gratitude. And I
Yeah.
think that's a basic response in everything we're talking about now. If we break through into
Yeah.
someone's heart like that, they feel gratitude and it opens them up to be receptive to the
Gratitude. Yeah, I think that's the word. That's the word to when people feel that they have that gratitude because of what you uh, lovingly did without any retribution or anything from there. I think that really is the key.
they
Definitely.
see that there's no self-interest, that
Yeah.
you're doing it for them because you care. That
Yeah.
has to
And I'm
feel
going
this
to point out something that about this podcast and what we talk about, within the Rancho book. And a lot of people ask me, what's the catch? Or so, what's the church or where do you have to go? And what, there's no catch. I mean, there's no structure, there's no dogma, you don't even have to read the book. You can only, learn about the teachings, which are really good, were really heartfelt. And there's no catch. You and I think having this conversation, and if somebody's really taking heed to it and their life is changing in any way, then that it for us is more than any, and it's gratitude for that, for being able to uplift somebody, right?
that's why we do it. We
Yeah,
care. We want them to have a better life. Yeah. Hope
awesome,
it
awesome.
works. Yeah.
Well, we're going to close it off with that. It was a really nice conversation, and a topic that's maybe off what we usually talk about. But I think it's really important how maybe not we neglect maybe this topic, but how important it is in how we relate with people, and we really build that brotherhood, on Earth. So thank you for coming, Susan. It was a pleasure as always.
Thank you. Well, God is love, and that's what makes the world go around. So it's a good
Yes,
conversation to have.
definitely, definitely. Well, and to you that watched us, if you liked it, please remember to subscribe and like it and share. You don't need to put on the reminders because we're basically every day of the week except Fridays no, Fridays we do the podcast. It's just the weekends, but basically all the rest of the week. So till next time, I'm Santiago Kneeland. This is the Divine Within, the invisible connection with God. Take care and carpe diem. On the Divine Within podcast, we share real conversations to help you find a personal connection with God. My goal is to support your faith, growth, and journey toward discovering the divine within yourself. Join us to deepen your faith and spiritual journey.